Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Arena Lights LLC, and it's in schus and merit of all the Yidden, Eretz HaKodesh and Eretz Yisrael. Hashem should protect them, Hine Layonim V'lo Yishin Shem Yisrael, especially in the land. Special providence. Eretz Hashem Elokecha Ba Mereishis Hashana V'ad Achris Shana, watched over by Hashem from the beginning to the end of the year. Special protection and blessing to those who are sacrificing their lives to protect and keep all the Yid and people safe in the Holy Land. So yes, we have to keep that in mind as we learn Tanya. And it's interesting that this program in Tanya, everything's Hashgacha Pratis, actually address issues that we can learn many lessons from in this special time. Last week, we finished Perek Chafei, chapter 25. And the focus there was that a person, b'chol eisha b'chol shah, at any given time, is capable of serving Hashem. As he concludes the Perek, because every mitzvah is a form of connecting to godliness and God's unity. Every avera, God forbid, every sin, transgression, is a form of disconnecting, and therefore a person always wants to be connected to the source of life, as we explained at length. And he concluded that with that we'll understand when Moshe Rabbeinu commanded the generation that was about to go into Eretz Yisrael, into the land, going to Eretz Yisrael, talking about Eretz Yisrael, Likris Kishma Paimayim B'chol Yom, to recite Shema twice daily. What's Shema? To accept God's sovereign authority upon himself, upon a person. But the fact is, wasn't this generation that entered the land promised that God will cast the trepidation and dread of you upon the land where you tread? So why do we need to have this Mesiras Nefesh? We were given that promise. So he said, but the reason is, Ella, B'shum Shekim HaTeru Mitzvaseh, because the very fulfillment of Torah and mitzvahs is totally B'zeh Sheyiska Tamid in Mesiras Nefesh L'Hashem Al Yechudeh. It depends on constantly reminding a person himself of the willingness to give his life, martyrdom, for God's oneness, as we learned at length. And this willingness needs to be inscribed in the person's heart always, literally day and night, meaning from all day and all night, so you do it twice in the beginning and then, so that makes it Tamid Mamish. So he's constantly being reminded on both bookends of the day, not passed from his consciousness, because through this you'll be able to stand, a person will be able to stand up against his impulse to evil, at all times and at any moment. So that's what it's coming to tell us. That's why he told them to say Shema. So yes, they had the blessing of protection, but this additional thing is critical to all Torah and mitzvahs. But we see from this that it only helps bring godly presence within you when you have that connection. So the idea that we're being mispalel now, we're praying in a time of war, creates more connection to Hashem and therefore more brachas. And with that he concluded chapter 25, and that concludes an entire section that went from chapter 18 through 25 that explains how the natural love that is mesuteres, that's concealed and dormant within a person, can be brought to the surface to be remembered and accessed, like he says here. That's why we say Shema, because if not, it could remain dormant. So when there's an emergency situation, a crisis, that we learned already, that even Pesach Yisrael and Kal Shabakalim, everybody, when you're threatened, are you going to be with God, or God forbid, serve an idol? Then a person will not allow themselves to serve. But when regular routine, when you don't have that threat, so you need to bring it alive, that awareness. And that's what he concludes here. That's the awareness that Shema brings. Hashem Echad, the Yichud. And that reminder brings alive that Ava, that he can serve Hashem all the time. And this is a mitzvah given specifically as the Yidden were going into Eretz Yisrael, even though they had the prayer, the blessing that they will be protected. It's interesting that he also says here that the pasuk tells you that that's regarding conquering the land. But there's also the Melchama Pnimius. There's also the battle that you fight within your Yetzer Hara. And that's where Shema comes into play. So the truth is, you could say that pasuk also helps you fight your own internal war. But when you say Shema, you bring alive the connection you have, the dormant, the love, the fundamental connection every neshama has to the Alakus, to godliness. Now, this was from chapter 18 until 25. Before chapter 18, we learned, primarily from chapter 12 and on, that it's through contemplation that you give birth to midas. So that was the first eifin. The first way we have Korav Elecha Dover Me'ein is through the effort of contemplation. In chapter 18 to 25 was through awakening the natural love. So we have both elements. Now we're ready to enter a new department, a new section in Tanya. And this too, you'll see, is also connected to battle, which we can learn lessons from as Yidden are battling the enemies in Iran at this time. Okay, so basically, now that we've established Korav Elecha Dover Me'ein, whether it's through effort, Avodas Ha'odam, that a person contemplates, or it's through awakening the natural love, but there still could be obstacles, other obstacles. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is now going to address in the next chapters, overall from chapters 26 through chapter 34. And what is it primarily going to address? What are the obstacles? So the obstacles are atzvus, depression, to be depressed and atzvus, and timtum alev, something that blocks him, from which arrives laziness, atzlus, and kavdus, a type of slothfulness, lethargy. So these are forces that can stop a person, even though we've established a case in how a person reaches that connection of Korav Elecha Dover Me'ein, but now we need to address the reality that there are things that can stop it. We have to overcome. What does a person do if they feel down or depressed? And the antithesis to that is the importance of having joy. That's what he's going to be addressing. So he's going to begin first with the things that can cause a person to feel down. How do you eliminate that? In chapters 26 through 28. Then he's going to talk about and how to therefore come to joy. Then he's going to talk about how to get rid of timtum alev. In chapter 31, that both, on one hand, a person has to be humble, but also be careful not to become depressed. And then we'll talk about the later chapters of how a person comes to Avos Yisrael, and then finally to Simcha Gdela Amitis, to true joy. So we're now going to address essentially a person's attitudes. Because again, a person can be a very powerful person, have all the tools and faculties, but if you're depressed or you feel very down, you feel demoralized. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is going to address now. So you see here again, back to the introduction to Tanya, this isn't just concepts. It's actually eitzes, likutei eitzes. The Alter Rebbe is giving us advice and guidance. And the reality is, even if you explain to the person the whole thing, but the bottom line is a person can still be, I'm not in the mood, or I feel very down. What do I do then? So that's right now what he's going to address. Okay. Now, important to emphasize that Chassidus Bechlal, the concept of simcha is vital. One of the foundations and fundamentals that the Baal Shem Tov taught was serving Hashem with simcha. Now, it's a mitzvah. Evdos Hashem is b'simcha. But we know that Baal Shem Tov emphasized certain things. It wasn't necessarily mechadish, but things that were either not being fully focused on or was being challenged. And of course, the antithesis to that is to do everything possible not to have atzvus, not to be depressed. Because we see, again, people could have a lot of qualities in their lives, but then they feel negative, they feel down. So we have many expressions of there's an expression from the name of Rabbi Adon Karliner, that he said that even though atzvus is not a sin, meaning an explicit sin in the Torah, but what it does can be worse than a sin, because it demoralizes you. When you're demoralized, you can't do anything properly. So he's going to address this now. As I said, the first chapters, till chapter 17, focused on how to use your mind to generate feelings for godliness. Chapters 18 through 25 was methods to get in touch with the dormant love found in our souls. So those are methods of doing that. But then we have challenges. So now the Alter Rebbe begins chapter 26. Again, how fitting is it when we're dealing with actual challenges that we have right now? Barom, says the Alter Rebbe, chapter 26. K'goin da tzarich le'edi klal godel. Tzarich le'edoi klal godel. But the following must be made known as an all-encompassing principle. Remember earlier he spoke about Klal Day in chapter 16, but he's now bringing another one that is important in the whole process of connecting with godliness. Which is to prevent other outside forces that even though you feel connected, or you could feel connected, but there are other forces we need to have a Klal Gadol. And what is the Klal Gadol? The importance of having a positive and confident attitude. And he gives an example right away. Look at the Ashgacha Pradis. Mama is talking now, there's a battle, a war being fought in Iran against our enemies. So he says here, so just as it is with a physical battle or competition, meaning a Pashtal Gashmi is the battle you're having or wrestling with someone. K'goin shnei anoshim hamesavkim zeh. Zeh im zeh. Lehapil zeh zeh. Such as two people wrestling with one another, each one trying to pull the other one down. An actual wrestle, two adversaries. Hine ima echad hu ba'atzlus v'kavdus yenutzach b'kal v'yipil. If one of them is sluggish and lethargic, he will easily be defeated and pulled down. In other words, even if he's stronger, even if the sluggish one is stronger than his opponent, but his attitude is one that doesn't, it's like psychological warfare. If you think you're going to lose, even if you're stronger, you will lose. Because it's not just a matter of what tools you have. As we learned earlier, it's your attitude. Kocha mamish. Exactly like that. The same is true literally. B'netzachan hayetzer. As it is in battle. And you see in battle, how important is the morale? That's why you see soldiers as they go into military, into battle, they sing a march of victory. They have a pep talk. They have someone leading them and saying, we can do it. Because that's so critical. It's not just the weapons they have or the tools that they have. So kocha mamish b'nitzachon ha'yetzer. The same is true literally with a fight against the yetzer, the evil inclination, the impulse to do evil. You cannot defeat it with sluggishness and lethargy. Literally, ba'atzlus means sluggishness or down, feeling down, depressed. Kavdus means feeling heavy, lethargy. That comes from, so actually atzlus, I should correct, atzlus, not but atzlus is like a sluggishness. That comes from where? Where is it rooted from? From depression and a stony, desensitized heart. That's the way some translate it into English. Timtum means something is blocked. Something is like it's some blockage, So basically, when a heart is like blocked, you're like emotionally blocked, you can't win. You can't defeat the enemy with that. Ke'im, so what's required to be able to win over an enemy? Ke'im bezrizus. Rather, only with zrizus, with alacrity, enthusiasm. Zrizus literally means with the opposite of sluggishness. With enthusiasm is a good word, with passion. Hanimsheches mesimcha o psichas halev. So before atzlus v'kavdus, sluggishness and lethargy, that comes from depression and like a desensitized heart. Where does zrizus come from? Enthusiasm. That comes from joy and an open heart. To psichas halev, the opposite of timtum. Timtum halev means like you're emotionally suppressed, supposedly repressed, blocked. But psichas halev, when you're emotionally open, a receptive heart. Free from any hint of worry and sadness in the world. So you see a person that's happy, besides the fact that it affects others in a positive way, it just allows you to do things with a whole different type of alacrity, a type of enthusiasm and excitement. But the first thing the Alter Rebbe is stating, the fact. We'll soon discuss how you reach that level. But before we get to that, the Alter Rebbe will address, now that we have this Klal Gadol. So the Klal Gadol is that what? You can have all the tools, you can even be stronger, but you're not going to win the battle if you're depressed, if you're sluggish, if you're lethargic, if you're blocked emotionally. You need to find ways to open yourself up. So here you have unbelievable methodology. Till now we've been learning about the techniques, how one connects to God. But now, how do you overcome? Or rather, now we need to address, what about the blockages? Literally. That's vital here. Because a person can have all the tools, but if they're not in the mood, or they're unable to get over their demoralized state, they're not going to get anywhere. They won't win. So this is critical also in how to reach Kodev Elach Hadover Me'ed. But the Alter Rebbe wants to now qualify. The fact, however, says, it says that Atzvus has a quality, has a mila, has a value. You're just saying that it's the opposite. It slows us down and paralyzes us. So he's kind of going to qualify. Umasha Kosov. There's a posuk in Mishlei, Yudalet Chov Gimel, Proverbs 14:23. B'chol the posuk says like this. Chol etzev yeh moiser. That's the posuk that I just quoted. What does that mean? In every sadness, there will be profit. Moshe is profit. So how's that consistent with what we just said? That it pulls you down, doesn't let you succeed. So he says, Pirush, that means that there's some virtue and advantage to sadness. So before we said the Klal Gadol, the all-encompassing principle, is that sadness is counterproductive because it doesn't allow you to succeed because it creates lethargy and sluggishness. Says the Alter Rebbe, Hine Adrabe, on the contrary. Meloshen zeh mashma, from this very expression of this posuk, she'etzev mitzad atzmei ein bei maila. From the way it's expressed is that the etzev itself suggests that the sadness itself has no virtue. Rak she'yagia v'yovim mimeno eze yisur. Rather, but instead, some advantage will be gained from it later. There will be a profit. Said choletzev, yeah. It doesn't say choletzev is a good thing. There will be a profit from it, even though it itself is not a positive at the time that you have it. So what is the pshat? So we see from this, there's different levels of sadness, or you can say called negative feelings. There's one that leads to profit and one that doesn't. And the one that Pasuk is talking about is a certain one that brings to a profit, to a benefit. V'hainu. And he explains, V'hainu hasimcha amitis b'Hashem elokov. The profit that sadness refers to here is the genuine joy of a person feeling connected to God. B'Hashem elokov, his God, your God. So that comes after an acceptable or justified sadness over a person's transgressions with a bitter soul and broken heart, which happens at specific times, but not generally. Generally, a person has to always serve with joy. But there are specific times where a person, through introspection and soul searching, recognizes a flaw or a misstep or something that is wrong, that they did that's wrong, a transgression, and that leads to the simcha that comes afterwards. So the otzev, so 2 points here. That not every otzev is, but otzev in general is not a positive. Even when here it brings to a profit, it itself is not the positive. It just leads you. If it's positive, it motivates you. You know, when a person, for example, makes a big mistake, or any mistake, there's regret, there's remorse. If that leads you to motivate you to do something better and to come to joy, so then it's the musa, that's the moiser, that's the profit that you gain. If it just demoralizes you as an end in itself, then it's not appropriate. So in general means it has to be only in specific times, and even then, only when it leads to the simcha, because the remorse, or the way he put it, the nafshi v'lev nishbar, the bitter soul and broken heart leads. Sha'ayidei zeh, he says, nishbar ruach hatuma v'sitra achra. So why do we need to have the negative feelings? Because the sadness, nishbar ruach hatuma, that breaks and shatters the impure spirit and sitra achra of the other side. So if a person did something wrong and they don't feel any remorse, then there's a certain contamination. How do you get rid of a person, let's say, has an infection, God forbid, or something else that has attached itself? You can't just say, let's move on and let's be happy. You have to get rid of it. So how do you do that? That's shvira salah. That's nishbar ruach hatuma mesitra achra through mar nafshe v'lev nishbar. So the atzvus itself is not an end in itself, and even that has to be done only at certain times. That's how the Alter Rebbe explains it, and it's so the klal gadol remains standing. Klal gadol is a person should always be positive. The pasuk says that there is a profit, a virtue, B'chol etzev. And that is, during those specific times he contemplates on it, that it leads him to a place of connecting deeper. So shal yidei zeh nishber ruach hatum v'sitra achra u'mechitza shal barzel mafsekes, and the iron wall, or the iron curtain, that separates between the person, beinei lav ovu shebashamayim, and his Father in heaven. This is the Gemara Psachim Pehei Beis 85b. As the Zohar, volume 3, Ches Aleph and Beis, Amid 8, A and B, says on the verse, a broken spirit, a heart that is broken, which is in Tehillim, Nun Aleph Yutes 51:19. That's what the Zohar says. That a broken heart that is broken and contrite, God will not reject. So, therefore, the atzvus, in this case, the etzev, kol etzev, is the breaking the spirit of the negative by feeling remorse. Because if you don't feel remorse, you don't have a conscience, how are you going to move forward? So again, both things. That means that it's not an end in itself, it's to brought it to grow, and two, it's only at certain times. And therefore, etzev mitzad atzmei ein by meila. However, if advantage comes from it, which is the great simcha that comes after a person does this introspection. And then, when you break the negative, when you shatter the negative by feeling remorse, by feeling that sadness, then will be fulfilled in him, will be realized in him the preceding verses. Tashmi'eni sosen v'simcha hashivali. Sosen yishecha v'ruach nediva v'gemer. Let me hear tidings of joy and gladness. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and sustain me with a generous spirit, which is the pasuk, earlier psukim in Tehillim Nun Aleph Yud and Yudalid, 51:10 and 14. So he's established the klal gadol of not having atzvus, and even atzvus in the right times, there's not an end in itself, it brings to a deeper simcha, like the pasuk clearly says. And with that, we'll stop here. So this is also the attitude we have to have now, even though people are afraid and there are threats. That first of all, amun and betachan Hashem. And that itself helps us become stronger, because when you feel weak, you can't fight properly. Both for the military and for Yidden everywhere. Hashem should protect them. We should only hear about the Nitzachim, Gamur, Mamish Teikuf Miyad Mamish. A good tevach.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit chasidusapplied.com for archived classes and more resources.